Welcome to the Den of Tools.
Howdy ho, guys and gals, it's Red, your friendly neighborhood tool bear, back again here in the Den of Tools. Today we're here to tell you about, warn you about even, probably the single best tool that you should never ever buy. Yeah, it sounds kind of weird to hear that, but what we're talking about here is the Shopsmith. Now, if you're not familiar with this tool, let me give you a quick background on it. So the Shopsmith started post-World War II. We had all these guys coming back from the war. They had all this training and all this money, and they wanted to start families, and they wanted to get, nothing makes you want to live your life more than coming back from war. And there was a huge, massive housing boom in the United States, followed shortly thereafter by the baby boom. So you have all these GIs coming back, buying these I think we call them now World War II cottages and such, buying all these small homes and whatnot. And they had lots of skills. They were very much in the DIY kind of mindset. Then we had Hans Goldschmidt. He was a German refugee, came to the United States because of the war. He saw all this going on, and he thought that there was an opening for a multi-tool that would allow people to just basically do everything that they needed to do in their own home shop, be it in the basement or the garage or whatever. But he realized, these are small houses, small garages. You couldn't have a whole, tool shop there for you. So you needed something smaller, and he invented the Shopsmith. 5 tools in one. In fact, you look at the old advertisement, look at this, $159.50, which if you know the price they go for these days would just make you probably lay down and die. But you'd get a vertical drill press, a disc sander, a horizontal drill press, a table saw, and what was the other thing? Table saw and a lathe, of course. And, these are fabulously made tools. They always have been since day one. I will be honest, though, like any kind of multi-tool, they do lots of different jobs, but they don't do any one of those jobs particularly well. Except that's not entirely true with the Shopsmith, and we're going to talk about that later on. So this was the original Shopsmith. It was the 10ER. And as you see, it came here. You could mount it to a bench. This was later, some accessory legs and bench that they sold. You could mount it about anywhere you wanted. You had the motor there. It was belt driven to the gearbox, and you had all the different attachments that would go on there. And here it's set up in the table saw configuration. These 2 parallel tubes here, what would happen is everything slides along that chassis on those 2 tubes. The motor, the attachments, everything. And that's how you get the modularity and the flexibility of the Shopsmith. Now, they went through several different iterations of this. Hard to find a Mark 1. Here is a Mark 2. These are fairly rare themselves. But with the Mark II, we started seeing, the metal base basically taking the shape of what we would come to expect in the future. But the one that really took all the fame and everything is the Shopsmith Mark V. Now that is, if anybody who knows about Shopsmith probably knows the Shopsmith Mark V. We saw infomercials and all sorts of stuff about the Shopsmith way back in the day. And the reason for that is that the company was founded back in the 40s. Hans Goldschmidt there, he came up with this idea and he started the company, and he did fairly well with it. And he eventually, though, ended up selling the company. They moved the production down to San Diego. It jumped around a whole bunch, but in the mid-60s, it kind of died off. It lost its traction, and it just kind of stopped doing. It basically ran to a halt. I don't know I don't think it actually shut down. I don't think they actually went out of business. They just stopped doing anything because there just wasn't the demand there for it. They weren't marketing it right and everything else. Well, another company set themselves up as Shopsmith Inc. They bought all the tooling and everything there for the Shopsmith, and they started that back up in the early 70s, around 1972. One of the first things they went into is they went and they showed it around at state fairs, which is the first place I saw it, which was here at the Iowa State Fair. Now, granted, this is a newer picture. I think I saw it back in the mid to late 70s. And at that same time is when we started seeing the first, what we saw, the as seen on TV kind of thing, the infomercials. I remember seeing a Shopsmith infomercial, seeing it at the state fair and thinking, wow, I really want to get one of these things. And you know what? The price, though, on these, even back then, was pretty expensive, around $3,000. And I was like, oh, that's never going to happen. Well, guess what? It did eventually happen. And this is how, if you do decide you do want to get a Shopsmith, I'm going to talk about buying used and why you want to consider that, because I picked up this. This is my first. I've had two of these. This is my first Shopsmith. This is a Mark V. This is right after I got it. I went through, I fully restored it, cleaned it up, took the motor apart. I really went through this thing. And I paid $200 for this. I could not believe my little bare eyes when I saw the ad for it, and I ran out, I picked it up, and I was happy as a clam until I started using it, and I really realized some of the issues there are with the Shopsmith. Now, as I said, it is a really well-made tool, and I will say to this day, the power head on this thing is fantastic. It is quite a piece of tech. It is a variable speed. You turn this little dial, and it changes incrementally at an analog pace. It changes what they call infinite variable speed. The power head on this. Now, also, I want to point out, this is set up in the drill press configuration, or not drill press, I'm sorry. This is set up in the table saw configuration here. And you got to love the exposed blade there. Now, they did come out with add-ons eventually that would enclose the bottom of the blade and do all sorts of stuff. But again, even with all the stuff, using this thing as a table saw is a sketchy endeavor at best. But the other thing is, if you see this little nub here on the back, that is connected to the quill, all that whole power head thing. So you have power coming out the top and power coming out the bottom of the power head, or the front and the back, however you want to talk about it. This is the second one I picked up, and this is right after I got it as well. And it came with a ton of attachments. I paid $175 for this one, and it came with the saw, it came with the plane, a whole ton of attachments at that point. But as you can see, it needed a lot of love. Now, Shopsmith even went on. This is the new Mark 7. This is the latest, greatest, and if you got the money to throw down, good on you, but they got away from the little wheel of power control to a full digital interface. It has 5 presets at 900, 1350, 2000, 3450, 9500. But then you can also control incrementally up and down at a digital level here. So, and they have lock, chart, confirm, forward, just amazing stuff you can do with the new power heads on these. And you can see this is the latest and greatest in what we call the Shopsmith technology. Now, as a table saw, this is what I want to talk about here. They have all sorts of attachments. They have outfeed tables. You have these filler plates. They've got the guard that goes underneath. They've got the safety on top with the built-in riving knife, which is excellent. And that's great. But, by the time you convert it from something else to this, you've added on so many accessories. It's a real pain in the fuzzy backside to deal with, especially if you want to change it back to something else. And at the end of the day, you only have a depth of your table that is maybe 2 feet, if that. It just is not. I always say, when you have a table saw, you want the biggest one you can get. It's just not there when it comes to that sort of thing. And also, now these are aluminum plates. You got to worry about, the accuracy across all of these things, because now you have several parts. You add moving parts, it becomes an issue, right? Well, now let's talk about the other stuff the Mark V, the Mark 7. All of these, I said, they all do 5 things. The Mark 7, I believe, does 7. And so what we got here is, here's the table saw up close and personal. One thing I will always say that Shopsmith got right is the miter saw gauge here, the clamping miter saw. As you squeeze the trigger, as you push it through, this part comes down, clamps in place. You've got one miter slot groove over here. The rest of these plates are all flat. Now, the next up is going to be the disc sander. This thing is actually pretty decent as a disc sander. I have to say, it's a large disc, variable speed power, everything you possibly want. The one takeaway, though, is to get that, you have to use up the entire size of the saw or the machine here, because it doesn't automatically get smaller because of that. So if you use it primarily as that, you're losing a lot of space. As a lathe, it is decent as a lathe. I've heard a lot of people say that they like it. Heard a lot of people say they didn't like it. I'm not one for wood turning, so I never even used it as a lathe. And the fact of the matter is, again, you've got to change your configuration, everything else. It's got a limited size for how big the machine itself is. I don't know. For those of you who are into lathes, maybe comment down below. Let me know what you think. Have you used the Shopsmith as a lathe? How do you think it compares to other options out there on the market? Maybe I should get Brad from Brad's Workbench on this. He's really getting into the whole turning thing. Now, this is an area where it shines, and you don't really see this kind of functionality in many other tools, and that is as a horizontal boring machine. Now, I do get a lot of people asking the bear, "Hey, what about using it for working with metals?" Because no, you just don't do that, because it doesn't have the kind of accuracy you're going to need for doing metal work. But which is a shame, because of all the flexibility and being able to use it as a lathe and in this kind of configuration, it would seem a natural fit for that sort of thing. All right. Of course, it can be used as a drill press, and this is probably the area where I feel that it shines the best. Moving on, you've got it as a shaper. So basically this connects to the back of the power head, and then you have it as an overhead router, which it doesn't work too bad as, really. You see running dados and rabbits and stuff like that. Now let's talk about attachments. This is where you start really turning this thing into the Swiss Army knife of power tools. Remember that little nub I said on the back of the power head? Well, this little white connector thing connects it to this. This is the 12-inch planer, and that provides power to the power head in this. Now, this still does need electrical connectivity, so it's for the auto feed and everything else in it. But for the main horsepower for the blades, it comes from the power head over here. I've heard good things about this. I never got to a point where I could get mine working and trying to restore it. I eventually needed the extra space, and it moved out. In fact, I've sold both of them. I no longer have one, because let's be honest, if you have the space to have dedicated power tools for all of this, do it. It's way better than this. Here's where you might want to consider a shopsmith. When you only have very limited space. If you need a full woodworking shop and you've got a one-car garage, maybe you might consider it, all right? But if you've got the space to throw at it, get dedicated tools. That's just all there is to it, because it doesn't do any of these jobs better than anything else, except for maybe the one that we're going to talk about at the end. All right, we've got a joiner attachment. We've got a belt sander attachment. We've got a bandsaw attachment. Now, I'm big into bandsaws. I was excited about getting the bandsaw with it. I was disappointed. I didn't find it to be all that accurate. The tracking on it was iffy. And, really, as I've often said, either, use a portaband style saw in a vertical setup, either with a stand or using a jaw horse, or jump up to a 14-inch bandsaw if you want a real bandsaw. All right. And it even has a biscuit joiner attachment. I didn't even know this was a thing until doing this video. All right. Now, this is pretty cool. If you have an older Shopsmith Mark V, you can get a replacement digital power head. Shut up, Moto. You can get a replacement digital power head that you just pull a third of the power head apart. This slides into it, lock it back in place, and you are ready to go. It's not an inexpensive upgrade, but it is a possibility. They also have a speed reducer for the headstock, for doing larger lathe work, that kind of stuff. We've got a 1-inch belt sander. I think it's a 1-inch belt sander with utility light for doing small detail sanding work. Now, outside of the regular Shopsmith Mark whatever series, they did do some other kind of weird things. This is their version of a dedicated table saw. I haven't seen one in person, but what I've seen from it, I was not impressed by it. It's probably not something I would want to have. Then we've got what they call their power station, which is essentially kind of a power head unit where you can put on it's for running the different attachments. Like you put the planer on there, or you put the joiner in it. So without running the rest of the whole Shopsmith, you can have just that. Also, we have some people doing a lot of mods. There's so many mods. You can waste days and days on the internet looking at Shopsmith mods. Here's somebody basically created their own power station by cutting down the tubes. That's all. I've seen a lot of these mods where they make them smaller by reducing, or by taking the tubes out, cutting them all to a shorter length, putting the stand back together. Now he's created basically his own power station. Then the Shopsmith actually sells this unit right here. This is, it's kind of like a power station. It's like a double duty power station, almost basically their own version of that last mod that we saw. Now, some people do set them up as a dedicated table saw. I have seen this. Again, it's not my favorite setup, not something I would recommend. Now, as I said, besides the fact that they don't do all those jobs as good as a dedicated tool would do them, their claim to fame is that you can change from one machine to another machine in seconds. Often they'll quote like in 90 seconds. Can you do it? Yes. If you got everything laid out, you're prepped and you got all your materials off and you're ready to go and like, okay, I'm going to do a change as fast as I can. Yeah. Yeah, you can do it. Is it fun? No. And if you're in the middle of production, you're in a shop environment, you're doing this, okay, all right, I'm done cutting now. I guess it's a pain. It is just a royal pain, and it doesn't take 90 seconds. It always seems to take forever, and it's cumbersome. I mean, this whole thing lifting the power head up to turn it into a vertical mode, especially if what you're changing to goes back and forth from like a table to a vertical. If you're going from the sander to the drill press and then back to the table saw and then to the router, oh my gosh, it's not fun. Can it be done? Yes, it can. All right. And I know I'm going to get a lot of grief from Shopsmith fanboys and stuff over this. I love the Shopsmith. I think it's a great tool, but I think that 99.9% of people don't need one. Of course, except for the one reason I've been teasing you about. All right. Because here's the deal with the Shopsmith this is it in its upright position. It takes up a lot of space. All right. You have to dedicate this much floor space. Plus, you have to dedicate the extra floor space outside of it for use when you're using it in the vertical position. But this is actually where it shines, is probably in this position because its best use is as a dedicated drill press. I kid you not. You have a variable speed, infinite variable speed, incredibly powerful, goes from high RPM down to a very low RPM. You can do all sorts. I've drilled all sorts of woods and metals and everything with this thing. You've got a decent table with, different plates you can put in it. You can make it a zero clearance. You've got a fence on it. This thing works great as a drill press. Now there are some people who will complain about the quill that's in it. It has a single piece quill. There is an upgrade you can buy to change it to a 2-piece quill. There's some question about how much accuracy it adds. I never bothered doing it. I never had a problem with it. Maybe because I took the whole thing apart and cleaned it all up on the inside and whatnot. But I had a fabulous time using it in this configuration. Now, why do I say you might want to consider this for buying one of these as just a drill press? Well, here's the reason why. If you look around and you try to find any decent floor standing drill press, you're going to be in shock at the price tags. I went to LA figuring there's a lot of people in LA here. I'm in LA online. I didn't drive there. And we look at this. This guy wants $500 for this old as hell Craftsman drill press. Now, I'm not saying it's not a good drill press. I think it's probably a fabulous drill press. It'll last a good long time. But you look at it. It needs belts. It needs cleanup. It needs love. It clearly needs work. And he wants $500 for it. No tire kickers. I know what I have. Yeah. It's hilarious. Whereas I could go out and buy a Shopsmith, a Mark V. This is an earlier version of the Mark V. They call it the Greenie, for $150. For $150, I could have a dedicated drill press. And that's what I ended up with here, is I left it in the upright position. Now, a lot of people do mod them. All right. But I knew at some point I would probably end up selling it. So I didn't want to mod it, but I then built this box with some spare scrap wood and stuff, sit on top of it. It helped lock it in place, reduce vibration, and I was able to use that as a bench for a bunch of my other power tools. As you see, I got a grinder on there. I got a jigsaw on there. I've got the little Harbor Freight sander on there. Kept a lot of accessories down here, ran all the wiring through the box to a power strip, control the whole unit through that. It worked great. It was actually a lot of fun to use it like this. All right. So I was, killing 2 birds with 1 stone, if you would. Now, some people take this a little further. I've seen this mod a couple dozen times, and I got to say, it does look fabulous. If I had a shop where I needed something like this, if I didn't already have a 17-inch drill press, but I don't know. I mean, this is a pretty cool setup. I will say some people do take the modding thing a tad too far, maybe. If you need the dueling drill presses, hey, there's a solution for you. But at the end of the day, you can keep it simple. This guy cut the tubes down, made it a shorter sawhorse kind of thing on it, flipped it around, and there you've got your not quite a floor standing, but kind of almost like a hybrid in between the full drill press and a bench drill press. You got a ton of power, a ton of controllability in that. It's a great setup. I don't know why you wouldn't want to do something like this especially if you could pick one up for that $100 to $200 price tag. Because as I said, the drill presses that are out there are way expensive. Buying one new is expensive. Yeah, we try to find you some deals and stuff like this, but this is the one time I would say, yeah, this is something that almost anybody could use in their shop, is a setup like this. And at the price for what you get, it's a no-brainer. Maybe you have to put a little bit of elbow grease into it to fix it up, but at the end of the day, you are going to be thrilled with what you have. But anyway, that said, as far as everything else, no, I highly recommend you stay away from the Shopsmith. Unless you're like one of those 1%ers who is like, I got a small area. I can't, buy all that separate stuff like you guys talk about. That's great. And we understand. And God love you for staying with it and fighting the good fight. But for everybody else, unless you're going to go with the drill press mod, you do not want to buy a Shopsmith, be it a Mark 1, a Mark 5, the 10ER, the Mark 7, any of them. Just avoid them. But for those specialty, kind of dedicated systems, maybe you might want to consider it. Anyway, that's all the Bear has for you today. You all take care. Don't forget to chomp the like button. God bless. And as always, shine on.